you're listening to My Alien Life.
So those kind of speeds exist in our galaxy, and this object came from outside of our solar system. Having a large relative velocity, remember objects in our solar in the galaxy are moving with relative velocities on average of between 200 and 300 kilometers per second, which is much, much faster than any object in our solar system. So any random object that wasn't part of our solar system happened to be traveling in the direction of our solar system, it could easily traverse our solar system with a speed that's incredibly large.
It had been tested on lab mice, and it didn't kill them, and so I wasn't really that leery about it.
I can see that there's a fear on his face. And he took off, we took off. So something was wrong there, man. Something was wrong there, man. They cut into something that they didn't know. They didn't know what was wrong there, man. And there was some problems.
My Alien Life is recorded high atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is heard all over the world, and you can listen everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you'll find links to every episode, stories, photos, the My Alien Life Legends page, and much more. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and consider becoming a patron while you're checking out all the content. I'm your host, Cameron Logan. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, two, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Cameron Logan. I live in Montana. Welcome to My Alien Life podcast. Today is Thursday, and glad to have you with me. Always glad to have you with me. It's going to be an interesting night because it's sort of a confessional from me and sort of something different. So I hope things work out. Hope the computer stays lit. Hopefully my new soundboard, which is a few weeks old, works. So that's cool. Yeah. It's good to talk into a microphone. It would be really cool if I had somebody sitting across from me that I could interview, but I don't tonight. I've been thinking about this a lot. Thinking about changing things up a bit. I mean, originally, of course, this podcast was kind of supposed to be about me. I never really intended on including anybody else because I had so many stories to tell. And then, well, yeah, there's a lot of stories to tell. At one time, as you know, I thought about writing a book. And then I thought, let's do a podcast. Let me do a podcast. Because it would be much easier for me to throw these words out there than to sit down in front of go through the painstaking process for writing a book, which I really did not want to do. Even though I had it started and mostly written, I never really liked the product. And I can talk a bit more about that later. But yeah, it's a hard process, and of course, once you get it written, then there's publishing it. And it seems to me that a lot of people are doing their own publishing, and that's great. I love that. Once I announced that I was writing a book and had some of it on my website, I had a couple of interests of people that listen to the podcast, names you've heard before, and not on my show, but on other shows. Or it was a publisher. one in particular who was very interested. And of course, that would mean me laying down some money. They write the book, have a limited hand in it where they actually participate in getting the word out there and actually advertising it in different ways. One of those ways was to notifying all these people that do podcasts and try to get you on their podcast, which, number one, I'm under the really firm impression that we don't need any more podcasts. And the more I thought about it, I thought, do we really need any more books about UFOs and strange lives and weird things that happen to weird people? I don't think so. So that got me moving in another direction, thinking, what do I do with this information that I have? Well, being that I intended originally to get the word out about my experiences via podcast, why don't I just keep doing what I've been doing? So I'll try that. I'll try to get my stories out. A lot of them are already written, and all of them are already written, but not in the exact way that I wanted to originally write it. It started to sound like everybody else's book out there that was about UFOs or the paranormal, whatever. I think it was written a little bit better, but I didn't like the way that I was doing that, and I didn't like the way I was seeing myself and reading about myself. So I started pursuing that type of writing in I wouldn't say an unusual way, but a different way. I, of course, wanted to mention this prior that I wanted to change it to read like fiction, like a novel. You would still know it's me in the book, but to me, that would be a more interesting way. So over the next few weeks or months or whatever we're going to do, I will portray me, not so much as fiction, but you'll hear about my story, and you'll hear about the way my life has gone and why it's so unusual. One of the big things that makes me think it's unusual is the fact, even though many times I didn't feel unusual, is the fact that my family and my wife say there are so many things that have happened to me that are extremely unusual. And I guess that's true. When oftentimes it's been utterly terrifying, and many times it seems like my normal life. And my normal life isn't so normal. And I'm, of course, comparing it to who? I have no idea. Comparing it to you, perhaps. What's your life like? Have you had dozens of experiences that you can't explain? Have you had experiences that have terrified you so badly that you spent decades of your life not being able to sleep at night? I hope not. But we'll get back to that. So here I am back in front of the microphone, looking at my computer. A while back, I got a new computer. Thank you to everybody who, during my GoFundMe and crowdfunding phase I was going through, you helped me out a great deal. And you come to a point where you just can't pump any more money into this because, as you know, there's a million podcasts and a million different reasons to listen to a podcast. And there's people out there who do an extremely good job, and there's people out there who do a horrible job. So somewhere I'm in between there, I hope, and that's fine with me. So tonight, again, in front of the computer, in front of the microphone, in front of this new Rode Podcaster board, which is a duplicate of one that I had that was lost by FedEx because it was broken. I got $50 out of FedEx, and that meant a lot in a way that it just came to a point where, anything was something. And I fought and fought with them because I didn't have the right insurance on that. And it was FedEx ground, and you really don't get any insurance. There was no evidence that it was ever lost because it had shown up on their scanning system, on their computer system, showing that it had been delivered, which it had not. Or at least the company that was going to fix it said they didn't have it. And I actually believed them. They were very helpful to me as well. So I ended up getting a new road board. Skip through that boring part, but and I got it on eBay, and it's really interesting. I got a good deal on it, and to me, it looked like somebody had a podcast and they decided to quit, and they sold everything on eBay. So I bought a couple things from them. The interesting part was the fact that not only did I get the board, they had their SD card still in the board. So I had all this information and song. I'm sorry, not songs, but different sound effects and things like that you can program into this podcaster board. And by the touch of a button, you can play music or whatever, voices, whatever you want. So to me, it's like I owned a part of this tech podcast because there's all this tech information on these different clips, and it's fairly funny. So tonight, just for kicks, one time only, I'll be playing some of the sound effects and whatever from this at random. There's one. That's not bad. All right, so that's the story about my equipment. I have equipment now. Thank you very much. It's good to be back in this limited capacity, but it's enough. It's doable. Okay. So again, I said I wasn't pursuing the book in the usual way that people would do for this sort of genre, this ufology genre, whatever you might want to call it. Definitely wanted to make the book sound more like fiction. So it's really not going to come across as fiction when you listen to my stories via podcast, but I'm going to do it and step outside my comfort zone because I really like to interview people. It's really easy for me to just sit there and listen to somebody else talk. And it's easy for me to come up with the next question. Sort of evolved from me writing out like 15 or 20 questions to a point where I just had a couple questions or maybe none at all. And if it was somebody that I knew a bit about, it was very easy. So, yeah, I don't get to ask the questions. I don't get to sit back now and listen to people and their interesting stories. So it's about me, more about me. So as everybody knows, I grew up in this little town in central Montana up by the Canadian border. And tonight I'm not too far from there. It's an easy drive to get there if I wanted to, but I don't go back there. I don't go back there. Why don't I go back there? Well, number one, I don't have any family there anymore. I do know people there. But it's kind of a real uncomfortable place. I don't particularly like to go there at night unless I have somebody with me. And I'd rather have 2 or 3 people than just one. So if my wife and I decided to drive up there at the spur of the moment, it wouldn't be something I would be real comfortable with. And after telling her a few of these stories, it's something that I don't think she would be comfortable with either because a lot of weird things happen. Obviously, if I went there, I'd be staying in a hotel. Don't really have anybody to stay with. And some of the hangouts that used to be in the area, and I'm talking an area that would go from the Canadian border south about 40 miles, there's not a lot there anymore. Not a lot to do. So realistically, there's nothing there for people to do. No reason to go there unless you have roots there that are still firmly planted, people to visit. I don't have that. So one of the things that I write about in my book is I would go out from the age of seven or so, go out to what me and my friends called the country. My parents called it the country. Everybody called it the country. And basically it was just the town where we lived in that area was mostly prairie. So me living on the prairie, it was either go south into town or out the back door, and we were out in the country on the prairie. And, I had friends who grew up there and lived there, and many of them are still there. So, it's they do different things out there, and you can go hunting out there, but for the most part, we were just out there just messing around. And as kids, it was great fun. There were gophers and deer and gullies that you could hide in. And for the most part, it looked flat, but there were features in there that basically dropped off. There were old house sites that had not wells, but cisterns that you could fall in, basically a square hole in the ground out in the middle of nowhere. More music. So yeah, there was that. And so we would go out there and try to stay out of trouble, try not to get hurt. And terrible music again. But for the most part, it was a good time. Oh, that sounds appropriate. So we go out to the country. And again, from the time I was 7-ish, probably peaked when I was 15, 16 years old. And we got more interested in girls and cars and things like that when I was 16 to 18 years old. And we didn't go walking out there as much, but something that always really interested me, and I'm not sure why, I'm not sure then why, but I'm definitely sure now why, was some features not too far from my house. And everybody called it a gravel pit, and it certainly could have been a gravel pit. But what it was maybe, it was 5 impressions out on the prairie, basically like not holes, but kind of like if you took a tortoise shell and pressed it into the earth. So these bowls that were out there. Now, immediately I'm sure you're saying, oh yeah, UFOs, here we go. But that's not the way that I thought of it. There are these impressions out there, and certainly gravel, sand, whatever, that's what were in these impressions could have been removed years and years ago. But, over the decades, kids had been out there and they dug and made trails and bike trails. And so we would take our bikes out there and we would ride around these impressions. And they were fairly unique in a way that, they were spread out. If you looked ahead, straight north, there was this big bluff. It was like a 400-foot cliff that ran from kind of east to west, west-east. And then directly adjacent from these impressions of the ground to the west was a hill that went down to a pond. But these impressions were, I would say that at the deepest, they were 20 feet deep. Around the edges, they were about 8 feet deep. So the middle, they were much deeper. So they were definitely like a pool shape, bowl shape, tortoise shell shape. And again, there was 5 of them. And in between them, there were people, you could drive there. So people had driven over the years. So, there was trails between them. And there was a draw there, especially with kids. And we would go out there. And I told the story before, coming back from these bluffs that were about 7 miles away. when I heard the loud humming noise with one of my friends. There was 3 of us that went out there. The one person stayed, the older kid stayed, and he kept walking further north. And as we came home, heading toward those bowls, me and another friend were terrified because we had heard this hum. And it started out of nowhere. And it was super loud, super scary. It was one of those things that came from everywhere. It came from the ground, came from the sky, almost like it came from both of us. Like we looked at each other and it was like emanating from us, and we could hear it. You could hear it in every, part of your body, and your bones and your muscles and your hair, and especially in your ears, and there was pressure in your ears. We had taken off running, and that was one of the podcasts I did. I think it was called Run. And, we tried to outrun this. And when it actually stopped, I'd felt like we were outrunning something. Something was behind us or in front of us, or, there was really only one way to go, and that was toward home. And ultimately, we were also running toward these impressions in the ground that had been there for years and years and years. And I'd asked my father and mother about them, and they had no idea what these things were. They assumed that, they could have been gravel pits at one time or whatever. So I thought about these things a lot, but only in a way that they were a place to play. And, it was great fun riding bikes in those depressions, and we did a lot of digging, and we built forts, and there was always something to do there. And then maybe when I was 11 or 12, I started having dreams about these things. And, as I had stated prior on different shows, I talked about my friends and I sleeping out. We'd sleep outside. We'd watch the northern lights. We'd see objects in the sky. Again, if you ever want to see a UFO, that's the place to be. You're not seeing satellites up there, because satellites don't speed across the sky and make a left-hand turn, or they don't stop and then start again. So, there was that. So that's something that you can definitely see there, and it's very interesting. But that's another story, and we've talked about that before. So these impressions became part of my dreams, and sometimes part of my nightmares. And the way it first started, and sometimes I have a hard time remembering this, it's so long ago, but one of the things that I remember is there's a vantage point a little bit to the east where there's a hill, and you can look down and you can see probably 3 out of 5 of these impressions, and you can look right in them. And you're probably not a mile away, maybe 3/4 of a mile away. Now, these impressions, again, they get to be 16 to 20 feet deep, and they're probably not quite as big around as a football field. Maybe they're 80 yards each. So they cover quite an area, so it's a pretty good size area. And so when you look out over these things, it sort of looks like, you can see parts of 3 dimples in the ground. The ground's pretty flat. So it's really nothing, impressive or anything that you would really wonder about, other than, there's these 5 weird holes in the ground. But so when I would dream, one of the things I would dream about initially was seeing northern lights, but it wasn't like the northern lights that I'd usually seen. They were bluish. And I had seen different objects in the sky later on in high school, and this big green flash outside my car driving home in the middle of the night. But this was a kind of an icy blue color, and a little bit different. But the dream started out where I'd see this icy blue color, and I really had no no other option other than to follow it. And that was me going toward this hill where you can observe these 5 bowls or 5 pits out on the prairie. So I would walk up this hill and I would look down. I could see 3 out of 5 of them, just like I could in the daytime. And over my right shoulder would be the northern lights in this blue color, or maybe not the northern lights. But as I looked over the bowls that were formed, these formations in the ground, I could see that they were full of this blue light. And the bowls that I normally couldn't see, I could see them glowing behind the other 3, full of this blue light. Now, to me, in dreamland, this was odd. And it was concerning. I wasn't scared during these first dreams. But the more I stood there and looked at this, unable to understand what was creating this light, and realizing, after all, it probably wasn't the northern lights, it frightened me. It frightened me. Hoping that maybe this blue light would light up the whole sky and I could see my way home. But for some reason, I had walked out there all the way following this blue light. But to turn around and go back, maybe the mile or so to home, wasn't an option because it was black in that direction. So really, the only thing that I can do would be to walk toward this blue light or stay where I was. And staying where I was just in these dreams didn't feel like an option because I was isolated up on kind of a hilltop. There was nowhere else to go except darkness or that blue light. So I was struck with this option. I could go toward the light, stay in the darkness. And that's kind of where those dreams would end. I had no idea really what to do. And I would wake up with that sort of same cloudy confusion. And I would say I had maybe a dozen of these dreams that always kind of turned out the same way. I kind of woke up and I was, back in bed. Didn't make any decisions out there. I didn't go anywhere. And it was frightening because I felt isolated and alone. And even in the daytime, at that particular time, I felt less likely to go out there, even in the light of day. It just seemed really odd, and it seemed like a very alien environment. And for some reason, these dreams changed my mind. Now, these are back in the mid-70s. I'm 56 years old. So it's a long time ago. And the world was a lot different then. So the dreams evolved, and I wasn't having these dreams every night. I guess I would say that they were random. Never really thought about it that way, but the dreams were random. They would come, they would go. So it wasn't something that I expected to happen. I definitely didn't want it to happen, and when it did happen, it caused me a lot of anxiety afterwards, and even more so later. So what ended up happening is I would dream sort of about the same place from different vantage points, and one of them was from my home itself, and there was basically a Jeep trail that went from our backyard out to these pits out in the prairie and out in the country. And so my usual path was down this Jeep trail. I'd go about 100 yards and there would be a gate, and it was barbed wire fence, and I would squeeze through the barbed wire in the gate and then go out there. Or if I had a bike, we would drag our bike underneath the bottom wire, which was really loose, and we would ride out there. So, I'd observe during these dreams the same place from different vantage points, but one of the most common one was on this trail that led to this barbed wire fence. And shortly after the dreams began, the barbed wire fence turned into more of a taller fence that was kind of a cyclone fencing with big metal poles, and not like the chain link that you would see now, but with bigger holes in it. But the poles on this fence were big, thick metal, maybe 4 inches in diameter. So, and probably about 8 feet high. And the gate itself was, a heavy fence, reinforced gate. It was always locked, and there was always a vehicle there, but not on my side of the fence, on the other side of the fence. And it was a white truck. And what was interesting about that, and what was scary about it at the same time, it was like no truck I had ever seen before. And I had approached the fence, and this truck would be on the other side of the fence, and it really reminded me of sort of the camo dudes that you see on the footage or people approach Area 51. Very similar to that. Now we're talking in the mid-70s where there's a truck, and it's a modern truck. This is a truck that I would say it could possibly be a truck that's from 2030. Let's say that. 2025 to 2030. And I'm talking the year 2025 to 2030. So keep in mind of what trucks used to look like in the mid-70s. Everybody had a Chevy truck. They came in lots of different colors, like orange and green, GMC green. Those single cab trucks that a lot of them were 3/4 ton trucks, and just super simple. This was not that truck. This was a modern truck, extended cab truck, which at that time I had never seen before in my life, and much, much different. So I hesitate to say that this was a truck from the future, but it was a truck from the future. Damn right it was. And, I recognized it as something futuristic in the dream as a kid. To me, it just looked too smooth and too shiny and too interesting and too much body detailing and too much glass and just a lot of white paint, white shiny paint. And the truck was a lot bigger, but it was a pickup truck nonetheless. So that truck was always there. So knowing as a kid that I couldn't get through the gate because it was this reinforced gate with this heavy wire and this truck there, I would approach the gate and I would just stand there looking. And then beyond the truck, I could see just a very, very faint glow from that side of the fence of these pits that were out on the prairie. And that sight, to this day when I think about it, makes me very, very uneasy. And it makes me very, very uneasy, or it did then as a kid, approaching that fence and almost frozen in fear, even though for some reason I walked all the way to the fence and I'm standing within feet of this vehicle that's so intimidating. And I probably had that dream 3 times, 4 times. And I remember one particular dream, I walked up there, and before I got, maybe 50 yards from let's say 200 feet from the truck left. Its lights came on, and I vividly remember side running lights, amber. I remember the tail lights super fancy, super detailed, super bright as it pulled away from me and drove toward those pits. And then basically disappeared into this blue light. But I remember those taillights, and I remember the detail of that truck. It was so modern, you know. It made me think of aircraft or something super, super fancy at the time. Now, keep in mind there were some fancy, nice trucks, but nothing like we drive now. And the paint scheme and again, the body trim and big wheels and tires. No other markings on there. I don't remember a license plate or anything on the truck. But it was scary because it was so different. You know, there's things we see in our dreams or in real life that are completely different. And they're frightening. Music. Thanks to whoever produced this high-tech podcast with this awesome music. So, again, the dreams changed. So there I am one night falling asleep, drifting off. And one thing about it, it's not like I was sleeping for a very, very long time, because I would wake up and it would be, you know, I had an alarm clock when I was that age, and it was maybe midnight I would wake up, whatever. So figure between 10 and 2 or 10 and midnight, I was having these dreams. So I had, you know, these dreams evolved to a point where, you know, I walk down this road, come to this gate, and this vehicle leaves and goes toward this blue light. So a few of those, very similar. And then one night, everything was different. I mean, I could see this at the moment I left my house. I could see lights out there all over. Like, at first I thought there were people out there with flashlights and closer to my house moving around. So I went to the gate, and the gate is open. And I can see these lights out there, and they're not people, but they're objects. And the objects are excavation equipment. So not only is there these excavators and bulldozers and there's probably 24 of them out there. And there's other things like big sort of belts that move gravel and debris into larger trucks. And I could see those out there, and I could see it because of the blue light, and I could see sort of even the color of these things, and a lot of them were orangish yellow, like we would see excavation equipment, Caterpillar, whatever now. And it wasn't particularly loud because to me, it's like now these high-tech pieces of equipment, it's not loud and annoying like the vehicles we used to see back in the day. But you know, these are fine pieces of equipment that are moving earth in a very controlled, very quiet way. And the other thing that was really different was the amount of blue light was different. And there was more blue light because it was almost like I was seeing these depressions in the earth that were full of blue light, but now they're upside down. So it's like these blue domes are out there, and I can clearly see most of all 5, or at least parts of all 5, and they're domes. Now, I'm not saying that this is a physical property. There's no dome sticking out of the ground. I'm saying it's a dome of light. At least that's what it looked like to me. And I stood there by the gate. I could see, you know, these trucks moving, and it's like they're working in unison. They're doing a job, and they're doing whatever they're doing for a common purpose. And, you know, I said there was at least a couple of dozen, but, you know, when you looked at the furthest impression out there. In the furthest pit, you could see more of these earth-moving vehicles and more of this operation back there. I mean, it literally looked like sort of, if you've ever been sort of on a highway project site at night or something like that. They have the lights set up. There was places bathed in normal light that you could see these tractors and vehicles driving through. But back then we didn't see that. I mean, there was that, a limited version of that, but it just didn't all of a sudden show up in your hometown on the outskirts, and people weren't doing this kind of work. So it was so detailed and so purpose driven and construction looking from some other time. I mean, that's the only way I can describe it, because at that point in my life, I had never seen anything like that. I had never seen vehicles like that. I mean, very, very similar, and of course doing very, very similar work, but not, I mean, everything was streamlined. The ones that were closest to me, I could see they have blacked out windows. There were several of these white trucks on the periphery on the left-hand side, maybe 5 or 6 of them that were all parked together, and you could see men out there with white hard hats. Those were the only human-looking things that I could see out there were to the left next to these trucks. So to me, it looked like a construction project, and they were, having a conference there about what this project was and what it looked like. So, yes, there was many dreams that were exactly like that. So what was that? And it was frightening, even though I didn't get close, and I could turn around and walk right back home at any time because I couldn't get any closer because of this fence that was there. I mean, for me, it was impenetrable. I'm sure it could be climbed, but it was not something that I would have even done in a dream. So every night, I remember probably for 2 weeks, I would have the same dream. I would walk out to this fence and I'd watch this excavation go on. And every night it was different. And every night I could tell that they were making progress. And every night these domes of blue light were even bigger. And it was highly unusual. So one night in the dream, I decided I'd walk along the fence to the left. And what the left was west. And I could get closer, actually, to this excavation because the fence kind of wandered and curved around one side of this excavation, and it kind of dropped down this hill. So as I'm walking down the hill, I'm getting closer to this excavation. The blue light is getting bluer. And it came to a point where I had to stop because I couldn't see anything because my vision was blocked by, at that point, probably 10 white trucks. These futuristic looking white trucks that had men with hard hats on the other side, and I couldn't see them. I'm assuming they couldn't see me at that point. And I'm getting a really, really good look at these trucks, and I can see a little bit of excavation going on. There's much, much more blue light. It's more vivid. It was incredible. I mean, it was an incredible thing to see. It's like if your whole world around you as a child was transformed into something else every night. And it was vivid, it was real, and to me, in my mind, there was no doubt that it was really happening. And it was changing my behavior in the daytime when I was awake. It was summertime, so I didn't have to go to school. But my behavior was changing. I was tired all day long. Really, all I did was, during my waking day, was to go behind the house and look out over the country and try to determine if I was looking at a landscape that had changed. I really don't know. I don't know if I was seeing a change in the landscape or my mind had just become so weirdly warped that I was actually seeing things from my dream. But to me, it looked like these pits were bigger. I didn't go all the way out there. I mean, I stopped within 100 yards before I came to these pits. I didn't really want to go out there any further. But I would just stand there and look out there, maybe for an hour and then go home and just sit around thinking about that. Until one night, the dream really, really changed. Started out just like it always would. I'd leave my house. It would be dark. I could see this really bright blue glow now. And I could see all the lights out there, and I'd walk toward it. And there was no truck parked by the gate. And the gate was open. I could see a string of vehicles, bumper to bumper to the west, far beyond the blue glow. And to me, it looked like they'd built a road, which probably went 2 miles to the nearest highway. And I could see more trucks on the highway going down the highway. And the highway, I could see some red flashing lights, like maybe a police car, ambulance, I don't know. But there were several of those out there. So it was sort of a convoy that left that area and then went out to the highway. So I walked, and again, to my left, there was a bunch of these white pickup trucks, modern pickup trucks standing there, and I could see the men. And I could get some detail. I mean, there was normal headlight light shining on them, as well as this blue glow from the pits. So one side of them everything was blue, and then the back of them were kind of lit up with this yellowish light from the trucks. And it was unusual because not only could I tell they were wearing these hard hats, but they weren't like any hard hat I'd ever seen. The closer I looked and got, the more unusual they looked and dressed. So they were wearing some kind of a suit. It was all one piece. And these guys were fairly big. I mean, I would say, they had to be tall, maybe 6'4". But I could see their hands and I could see their faces, but their faces to me, looked absolutely featureless. I mean, there was no ears, no nose, and that was frightening, extremely frightening. I was thinking, what have I gotten into? And at that point, I actually turned and I'm going to run home, but I can't see home because it's too dark behind me. And I could see to the left beyond where this new road had suddenly appeared and all these trucks were driving toward the highway. I could see that there was mounds and mounds of mountains of earth that they must have dug these holes in the ground and moved the dirt. The weird thing about it is that, there were these holes in the ground that I explored and played in, but there was never any sign of where this dirt was or where it was, the sand or gravel or where it was taken. Everybody assumed that, nobody really knew what these were. They assumed that they probably were there prior to 1920 or whatever this town came into its existence. They were there that long, I mean, my family and I moved there like 1966. So they were there then. They're still there. So this whole caravan of vehicles are going out to the highway. Have no idea why. Lights are flashing out on the highway. I can see it's probably 2 miles away. And this blue light is everywhere. And they're blue domes, probably 20 or 30 feet high, probably almost 80 yards wide. And I wouldn't say they're smooth as glass. I mean, there's light radiating out of it, so you can't really tell if there's an object there, or you can't really tell if it's just light. But being that it was dome-shaped and gave off light, but most of the light sort of ended in this dome shape, it had to have been something physical, I would guess. And there I was standing there looking at this. And I get the idea that, I look down and I can feel the earth is different. It's not the usual prairie. There's no grass. There's no, I had walked up to this space where all this earth has been removed, and these domes, to me, I got the sense that they had been unearthed, rather. Let me put it that way. Had been dug up or unearthed, and they removed the earth around all these domes. Some of these big trucks are being filled with earth, and they're taking it somewhere. To me, it looked like they're still building a road, moving this heavy equipment out to the highway. I get the sense that they're getting ready to leave. I look over to my left. I see these men that had no facial features. Wearing these white sort of overalls. But these dreams now are not dreams. I mean, they are not dreams. It's literally like I've been transported to another time, and as I turn around, I realize that there's a town behind me, and it's not too far away, but I can't see it. But then once in a while I look back and I can see some light, and I could see a house, and I could see, maybe one time I remember seeing a truck or headlights behind me. And I felt like I needed to move to the side. They were so far away, 2 or 3 miles away, but they were definitely headlights. And I moved to the side because I felt like these headlights are going to come toward me. And they didn't. But honestly, what I realized is that, am I looking back at my own hometown that had 2 or 3 houses and maybe a couple of vehicles, 50 years prior? I don't know. I mean, there definitely wasn't much there. I don't know. I mean, to look behind me was like looking to the past, and looking forward was like looking to the future. So, and where I stood seemed to be the future and the past, sort of the border between the future and the past. Does that sound odd? So I don't know. I really don't know what that was. But yeah, there was really, it was hard to walk back and I would walk back toward my home, away from this place, and I could still sort of feel around, and there was enough light to see where I had walked to get there and through that gate. And then when I had walked through that gate, the dream was over. I would never wake up in the middle of the dream. I would always wake up in the morning. So the last one that I can remember, I'm standing in the back of my house. It's dark. There's the blue glow. It's very, very vivid, very, very bright. Can clearly see 5 blue domes, blue light everywhere. And the trucks to my left drive by me, one after another. There must have been 10 or 15. And as they drive by me, I just realize they're so huge. They're so huge. I mean, I would say, in retrospect and comparing to what we see now, like a big, Ford F-350 truck, it was probably 1 1/3 the size of a modern pickup truck now. Huge. So as they're driving by me, I'm frozen. I can't move. I'm not too far from the gate. They drive through the gate. The gate's open. I can see these bright taillights. I mean, every bit of a truck with a taillight as you look from behind, as we have now. Again, this is in the mid-70s. Very futuristic looking to me then. Would even be a bit now, I think. A bit futuristic. They drive through the gates, go to their usual place. These domes are bright. There's less excavation equipment out there. As far as the furthest blue dome, there's some excavation equipment there, and I can see some other lights that have been put up. But around to the right-hand side, there's something that looks like buses. Sort of like old school buses back then, but just perfectly square. And they're white as well. But they have the little windows on the side. And as I approach, I'm walking toward them and realize those aren't windows. They're just really, really dim light. So there's a bar of light that goes across these trucks. And they're buses, and to me, they're meant for carrying people. And they start to leave. And as they round the far side of these domes, some other vehicles join them with red lights flashing, red and blue lights. The blue is the same color as these domes. And they drive off to my left to the distance until they get to that highway, and I can see them drive off, 30 minutes later, and they're driving off and disappear. And it's amazing. It's amazing. I'm so stunned. I just can't understand what I'm seeing. After seeing night after night of all these vehicles, and then all of a sudden I see these buses and then disappear. It's just overwhelming. And I remember feeling like all of a sudden there was no gravity on the earth, and there was nothing holding me down. I didn't float away, but I just kind of floated backwards. Backwards until I blacked out. It was almost like I fell asleep standing up. And then I have these, I don't know how to describe it. I have these visions of being in one of these pits of blue light, And I could see all these dark objects, and they're tall people. And basically they're just dark shadows walking around, and they're walking around me. And I'm sort of, maybe my feet are a foot off the ground. I'm sort of in a sitting position, almost a reclining position. And all these objects are walking around me, all these people, all these dark shadows of people walking around in this blue light. And I look up and I can see that it's clearly a blue dome up there. And I can see the darkness beyond it. I would say it's like glass, but it's not like glass. It's almost like energy. And all these dark people are walking by me, and they're looking at me. I mean, it's like they're taking turns looking at me. And I have an apparition, sudden knowledge that this happened a long time ago. And these people were here a long time ago, like millions of years ago. And they disappeared. They left. They left like 50 years prior. And then they were gone. I never felt like I wanted to go with them. It was something I was very afraid of. Still am, probably. But they certainly were here. I have no doubt about that. And these futuristic looking vehicles and people or creatures were something from the past. For some reason, I was able to look into the past and see them in their last moments here after being here for millions of years, maybe longer. Yeah. It's crazy, man. I'm Cameron Logan. Thanks for joining me. We'll have more of my alien life and all the crazy things that have happened to me. We're going to hear more. We're going to hear more. Please join me. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to fine podcasts. And please listen every time you get a chance. And tell somebody about it, because this is important. I don't think it just happens to me. It could be you too. Thank you. Good night. You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains.